People are experiencing a weird side effect with America's new favorite weight loss drug, Ozempic. Also, men are getting a highly complex surgery so that they can be a few inches taller. And some NBA players are using a unique form of yoga so that they can stay healthy and move better. We're going to talk about all that today on the Prescription Press, the podcast where we break down medical news stories so we can live healthier and better lives. I'm your host, Nolan Fisher. I'm a physician. Let's get into the articles. All right, so here's our first article. It's from NBC News, and it's titled, "Some People Taking Weight Loss Drugs Say They're Experiencing Hair Loss." Now, before we get into the article, I want to tell you why this article caught my attention, okay? Ozempic has been incredibly popular, and it continues to become more popular, and more people are using it. As a result, strange side effects have been reported, and it works like this with any drug. The more people use it, the more side effects they find out about. And so some of those have been the more common ones, like bloating, abdominal pain, nausea, diarrhea, or constipation. But people have also been reporting fatigue, and then now they're also talking about hair loss. And because it's so popular, I wanted to read the article and see what they had to say about it. I also want to give a background on Ozempic itself. For those of you who haven't seen my previous podcast, there's a few drugs that are important and are talked about in this article, and they all work the same. There's Ozempic and Wegovy, which are both a medication called semaglutide. Wegovy just happens to be stronger and FDA approved for weight loss, whereas Ozempic is only FDA approved for type 2 diabetes. Mounjaro, on the other hand, is a medication called tirzepatide, which is also approved for type 2 diabetes. Whenever they first made these medications, they thought it helped, particularly with the body being sensitive to insulin so that blood sugar could be moved out of the blood and you could get your blood sugar back to a more normal range. What they found were that the side effect that was most prevalent was significant weight loss, and that was for a couple of reasons. First, it prevents your stomach from emptying as fast as it usually does, so you experience a fuller sensation for longer after eating. And then second, it works on the brain to decrease cravings and also decrease your appetite there. So that's the background on Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro. All these medications are an injectable. They're working on getting oral forms, and I think one just came out, but I haven't heard how that works yet. And so I know these are effective. So let's get into the article. So the article starts out by saying that these medications continue to soar in popularity, and then they have some interviews with physicians who talk about their patients are coming to them and saying that they're losing handfuls of hair, and it's really disconcerting to them. A few of the questions that they seem to have and that seem to come up throughout this article are, is the hair loss a bad thing? Is it due to the medication? And then they're concerned if their hair will grow back. Whenever I first read this, I was wondering if they were going to list any data or studies that showed this, and they actually did. They said that clinical trials for Wegovy, which was the weight loss approved version of Ozempic, a stronger version, 3% of people during those trials reported hair loss compared to 1% of the people who were taking the placebo. So it shows that there's a pretty significant difference there. And in the clinical trial for Mounjaro, 6% of the people taking the highest dose experienced alopecia, which is just another term for hair loss. And that was, again, compared to a placebo that only showed 1%. And so, of course, Eli Lilly, who makes Mounjaro, said, yeah, this is temporary, not a big deal. But obviously for patients, this is very concerning. And the reason that this happens is because of the shock to the system. So most people, whenever they're gaining weight, they tend to gain a little bit of weight consistently over a long period of time. So it almost looks like a graph that's slowly going up. Whenever people take these medications for weight loss, they can lose what it says here is 5% to 20% of their body weight in the first 6 to 12 months. So you can imagine that's a dramatic drop, and it happens because people are eating less. As a result, they're getting less energy into their body, and so it's a significant change in the amount of energy that you're getting. So your body kind of freaks out and decides that it needs to respond. And the way it responds is by eliminating all unnecessary energy expenditures. So the result is that the hair starts to fall out. The article then goes on to assure the readers that it's temporary, it doesn't affect everyone. And then there's actually a really good quote in here from a Dr. Andrew Craftston, who is the director for weight navigation program at Michigan Medicine. He compared the phenomenon to a tree in autumn. Trees lose their leaves, but no buds replace them until spring. Then it says hair loss is a common side effect of significant weight loss during a short period of time, and people who undergo bariatric or weight loss surgery are usually warned ahead of time that this could be a side effect. So it seems like this is the same side effect, and instead of surgery, it's just medical and medication induced. So then, of course, the next step is, well, how can you prevent it? And that's what people are asking. And the general advice seems to be you need to make sure that you're getting enough protein and the right minerals, the right vitamins in your diet. In my opinion, the best thing you can do here is work with a dietitian, because not only can they help make sure that you're getting the right amount of nutrition while you're taking this medication and you're safely losing weight, but they can also help you build up the lifestyle habits so that the longer you're on this medication, and once you get down to the weight that you want to be at, you can slowly start to come off of it. Because at the end of the day, it's an expensive medication. And I feel that insurance companies, if they do cover it for weight loss, once you get down to a goal weight, they may start to say, hey, we aren't going to cover this anymore. And then on the other side of that, if you're paying for it out of pocket, it's obviously super expensive and people are going to want to come off this medication. And who knows what other side effects there will be. So I think the right thing to do here, if you're taking this medication, one, get ahead of the hair loss by, wow, that was incredibly ironic. Get ahead of the hair loss by working with a dietitian, make sure you're getting enough nutrition, and then also build up those lifestyle habits so that you can come off of these medications and you don't have to be stuck on them forever. And that's all I have for that article. Let's move on to the next one. All right, this article from NBC News really caught my attention. The headline reads, leg lengthening surgery is gaining popularity among men seeking to be taller, doctors say. And then in the subheading, it talks about a 26-year-old man who got a procedure to go from 5 feet 7 inches to 5 feet 10 inches. And then he goes on to explain what it's like. Now, before we get into it, I want to let you know this caught my attention because we're seeing more and more medical procedures that are aimed to make people feel better about their image. And you can think about simple, but still expensive procedures like Botox and lip filler and stuff like that, that people like go to med spas and get. But there's also other ones like boob jobs and butt lifts and tummy tucks and stuff like that that are fairly complex procedures that people have been seeing plastic surgeons for years. And so this seems to be another one that's starting to gain some traction for shorter men. And then one more thing before we get into the article. This procedure that they're going to talk about isn't actually new because it's been used for a long time for people that have one leg that is shorter than the other. And this happens because of birth defects, but also can happen because of a fracture whenever you're a child and growing that can go through the birth plate and affect the length of one leg versus the other. And it can be extremely problematic because people will move differently if they have one leg shorter than the other. And that can cause back pain, hip issues, knee issues, stuff like that. And a lot of times people will try to use like shoe lifts and stuff to offset it, but some people actually need a lengthening surgery. And so with that being said, let's dive into the article. So the article starts out talking about a person named Alex, which isn't his real name, but he's 26 years old. He's otherwise healthy is what it sounds like, 5 feet 7 inches. And he went to a physician in Burbank, California to get the surgery to make himself taller. And he ended up getting a leg lengthening operation to increase his height to 5 feet 10 inches. And he said his goal wasn't to be tall necessarily, but it was for people to not look at him or treat him differently because he was so short. And I'm going to read a quote from this article right now because I think this pretty much blew my mind whenever I read about what this guy was willing to go through to be 3 inches taller. The $75,000 4-hour operation, which is not generally covered by insurance, involves cutting the thigh bones in each leg and inserting rods inside them. Then, over the next 3 to 4 months, the rods are lengthened by up to 1 millimeter per day via an external remote control. New bone grows over the rods. Physical therapy is required. For 4 months following his surgery, Alex went 4 to 5 times per week and used a walker. As he regained his mobility, he switched to using a cane. The final step of the process is removing the rods. Alex returned for that hour-long procedure a year after the first operation, and his insurance footed the $10,000 bill. In total, Alex estimated the whole process cost him $100,000. $100,000 to go from 5 feet 7 inches to 5 feet 10 inches. The crazy thing is he 5 feet 7 inches isn't that short. I think the average American is like 5 feet 10 inches, maybe. So it wasn't like he was ridiculously short. It wasn't like he was Danny DeVito over here. And then he goes to 5 feet 10 inches, which also, if I were him, I'd been like, hey, take me up to 6 foot, dude. At least then he doesn't have to lie on his Tinder profile. But he went to 5 feet 10 inches and he appears happy with it. And the cool thing about this article is that they included a picture. So if you're watching on video, you can actually see here is a picture of him standing next to the surgeon who did the procedure. And there it is. Looks much taller. Now, another interesting part about this story was that they interviewed the surgeon who did it. And he said that he's doing about 50 of these operations per year. And just a few years ago, he was only doing like 20 per year. He said he typically does it for the one-sided leg length discrepancy, but now people are coming to him to do it more often. And it's even like 60 and 65-year-old men that are doing it sometimes. He said he describes it as short stature dysphoria, which is a body image issue, and that people will go to therapy. And then if they don't get better from therapy about their stature, then eventually some of them go on for surgery. Finally, down at the bottom of the article, they talk about some studies on height. There's one where they talk about men being satisfied with their height, and then women's preferences for height, and then also income differences between men that are taller and shorter. The problem with these studies is that they are all full of confounders. And so you can look anywhere and see an example of successful people that are shorter. I mean, listen, Napoleon was like 5'6", Genghis Khan was like 5 feet tall, and they were fairly successful in doing what they wanted to do. And so I don't think that these studies that say that, oh, taller people earn more money or something like that are really that reasonable, because usually they're missing the picture of like generally people who grow up in wealthier countries are better nourished, and if they're better nourished, then they grow taller, but they're also in a wealthy country, so they have the ability to make more money. So a lot of that, there's a lot of noise that is clouding the picture for those studies. So I don't think you can attribute it all to just height. Then finally, and most importantly, at the bottom, there's a quote that says, although leg lengthening surgery comes with risks, including nerve injury and a loss of range of motion, the procedure is safe as long as it is done by experienced surgeons. They're doing these and they say they're safe and they're experienced surgeons, and that's great. But surgeries lead to complications, and it may be a small percentage of the time, but eventually somebody is going to do a surgery like this, have a complication, and either die or have a bad outcome, such as an infection, extensive bleeding. It may lead to an amputation or something like that. So the truth is, I just don't think that this is worth it. And if you have these body dysmorphia type disorders, those are better dealt with through psychologic therapy rather than surgery. Because my concern is what happens when this guy is 5 feet 10 inches and he transfers over that body dysmorphia to something else, and he's still not happy even though he's taller. And hopefully that doesn't happen for Alex in this case. And it seems like Alex had a good outcome, but we don't know what the complications can be further down the line from this. And I think adjusting your natural body by doing this surgery just seems way too extensive, way too expensive, and just overall not worth the risk. And obviously that's just my opinion on it. I'm sure Alex has a different opinion. Let me know down in the comments what you think. If you're watching this on YouTube, drop a comment and tell me what you think about this surgery and if it's worth it or not. And that's all we have for this article. Let's move on to the next article, which is about an NBA player named Kevon Looney who is doing some yoga. So this article is from the New York Times, and the headline reads, "The Yoga Regimen That Keeps an NBA Forward Centered." And it talks about Kevon Looney using a special form of yoga called joga to stay healthy and then to perform better on the court. This caught my eye for a couple of reasons. One, I love NBA basketball. And I've heard before about NBA players who use different forms of yoga in order to stay healthy and to move better and to feel better when they're playing basketball. So when I saw this, I hadn't heard of this yoga form before. I know NBA players previously were doing a lot of hot yoga. Also, yoga is something that we know works really well for a variety of things. One, it helps with mental issues like depression, anxiety. It's shown to improve that. It also helps with chronic pain, and it can help keep your muscles and tendons healthier for longer and help you keep moving better for longer. So let's get into the article. Kevon Looney, it talks about him doing yoga in the morning before their most recent playoff game, which was on Sunday, which they ended up winning. He got up and did yoga 4 hours before the game, and he did it with a lady named Jana Webb, who has created her own self-styled brand of yoga called Joga. And she describes it as yoga for athletes. And she focuses on making the body move in a healthy manner. Also, staying centered is what she describes as it's focused on. So it helps with the mental part of the game as well. Then it goes to describe that session that they did, and he did it actually with another one of his teammates named Moses Moody. It gives some pictures of him doing the yoga, what they call yoga for jocks, before the game. But then it talks about him in high school. When he was in high school, he apparently started doing hot yoga or Bikram yoga and really enjoyed it and was doing it all the time with one of his friends. But then after he got out of high school, he went to UCLA, and there he got busy, and so he didn't do as much yoga. He ended up getting drafted 30th overall in the 2015 NBA draft. His rookie year, he had hip issues, ended up having to have 2 surgeries, and then over the next few years, he had a few different instances where he was injured and was out for some time. Finally, he had core muscle surgery in 2020. And then when he came back in 2020, 2021, he was really disappointed with his play. He felt like he wasn't as mobile as he used to be, so he couldn't play defense as well, and he couldn't get as many rebounds. And he's a center. He's a big guy, 6 feet, 10 inches. So he has to be able to be big and strong and physical, but also has to be able to move side to side and be able to get off the floor to get rebounds. And so there's a cool story in here about how he goes to somebody from the Golden State Warriors and asks if they know a yoga instructor. And so the quote says, "Following the season, Looney approached Dr. Rick Celebrini, Golden State's director of sports medicine and performance, with a specific request. Did he know any yoga teachers? In fact, Dr. Celebrini had someone in mind. He connected Looney with Webb, a fellow Canadian who had worked with other athletes for years. Their first virtual session was a doozy. I can't say I loved it," Looney said, "mostly because I stunk at it." Webb was unsparing in an initial assessment that she sent to Kyle Barber, Golden State's head performance coach, citing several areas where Looney's mobility was limited, but she saw potential. And Looney experienced the sort of post-session soreness in his glutes and his abdominal muscles specifically that signaled to him that he had room for improvement. Quote, "We don't do a lot of long static holds," Webb said. "It's really about duplicating the biomechanics of movement in sports." So Kevon Looney then went and worked with her several times a week during the off season. It sounds like they did most of their sessions virtually. And then for the next season, he started off the season, was feeling good, but after a few games, he hadn't been doing the yoga. He had just used it in the off season, and he started to feel like his body was reverting back to where it was at before. So he gave her a call and ended up scheduling yoga sessions before every single game. And the results were fantastic. He's had his last 2 seasons, he's had his best seasons of his NBA career. He's also played in all 82 games in back-to-back seasons, which in today's NBA, people just don't do anymore. And he's doing it after having all these injuries And on top of that, he's a big man. So he's taking a lot of stress and beating every single game. Then finally, the story ends with them just meeting each other for the first time in person in December when the Golden State Warriors went up to Toronto to play the Raptors, which is a cool ending. And I think this is a great story that we can apply to our lives. And that's why I chose it for the podcast. Yoga can not only help center us mentally, it can help with breathing, which we know helps with mood, depression, anxiety, and stuff, but it also can keep us healthy and keep us moving. And I think all of our goals are, as we age, to continue to be able to move and do the activities physically that we'd like to do, whether it's playing basketball or playing with grandkids. Movement is so important to our life. And I think that this is a good example of how we can apply it. And if we are diligent about it, we may not be able to play 82 NBA games, but at least we can do the things that we like to do. And also, even if you are somebody that is physically active already, let's say you're doing a lot of running or weightlifting, incorporating yoga can be so helpful to your overall mood and then your feeling that you have with aches and pains in your body. And I think it's a good addition to any fitness program. And that's all we have for the podcast today. Thanks again for listening. If you're on YouTube and you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing. If you're on Spotify, please follow. I'm your host, Nolan Fisher. This is the Prescription Press. I'll see you next time.